Greetings, brothers and sisters in Christ. It's a great joy to be with you, especially in this inaugural virtual conference of the Theology of the Body Institute. What I wanted to focus on in our brief reflection is the significance of this conference taking place in the month of May, which is the month dedicated to Mary, the crowning of Mary, and what does this have to do with the message of Fatima and the connection of the theology of the body in relation to the message of Fatima. So I'm hoping in this brief time we can put these pieces together in a way that will really get you excited to dive into the theology of the body. And if you've already done that, to make it more part of your heart. Because as we know about the message of Fatima, it's all about the world getting a heart transplant. And so what I want to do is I want to focus on the one line of our Blessed Mother that gives us great hope, especially at a time where we really want hope. With this pandemic and where's the world going after this, what's going to happen during it. There's just so much uncertainty and the world is being shaken. And to go through it is a hard thing, but ultimately it's a good thing. The world needs to be shaken up. The world needs to be awakened. The world has been living in darkness, as we'll focus on in a little bit, for so long. So God gets our attention through these kinds of events. What God permits is always for our ultimate good. And so I want to focus on this one line of our Blessed Mother, the key line of the message. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. Okay? In the end. In the end of what? Well, the end of an era. 1917 really launched a whole new section of history. You know, you could say 100 years before then you had the effects of the French Revolution, which were what? Anti-God, anti-church, anti-family. Okay, largely led by the Freemason movements and how they influenced the philosophies and the leaders of those times. Well, you go to 1917, that's the 200th anniversary of Freemasonry. And they were proclaiming at that time in Rome, that St. Maximilian Kolbe himself even watched us, saying, how we're going to destroy the church. We're going to pervert the morals of the people, and the church is going to crumble because nobody's going to want to follow a church that is constantly an inconvenience to what you want to do. It's like, whoa, Satan was really beginning to show his face. Then we had what? We had the founding of Planned Parenthood in 1916, and it ended in 1917, really begin to grow. Now, this culture of death, this godlessness, the fruits of all that, all this is now beginning to whoa, this is where this is going. And you also had World War I going on at the time, and you also had this movement, this foundational activities of a revolution in Russia. People didn't really know what was going on there. And in the midst of this, Our Lady appears in Fatima. And so with this whole thing of in the end, this end of an era, well, we got to go to right before those words, Our Lady showed the children a vision of hell. And in this vision, she showed the children just the forms that souls would take who went to hell. And they said that they saw so many souls falling into hell. It was countless. And they said it was like watching snowflakes fall in. And Our Lady said, you've seen a vision of hell. It's real. Where the souls of poor sinners go. And when the children were later asked about that vision, they said the number one sin, the main sin that was leading those souls into hell was the sins of impurity. The sins of impurity that go right against, if you could say, that go right toward the heart of our sexual identity and the abuse of that. How serious those sins are, because it is the sins, because it is our sexuality that reveals who we are in the image of God. And Our Lady says, in order to prevent this, so it didn't have to happen, it doesn't have to happen, because I'm calling for the consecration of Russia and the celebration of the first 5 Saturdays of each month to be in honor of her Immaculate Heart and reparation for the sins committed against her Immaculate Heart. And so these sins that she's talking about and these errors of Russia, that's the era that we're in right now. Because by the time Our Lady finished in 1917, October 13th, that was the month of the Russian Revolution that took all of these evil philosophies of the French Revolution added them to the philosophy of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, who was his friend, and they were atheists. They were against God. They were against the spirit. There is no spirit. There is no God. Only matter matters. And so you've taken out your objective point of reference for how you gauge anything in life and in morality. Life is simply a series of contradictions and opposites, differences that we have to eliminate to find a common value that is shared among all. In other words, it's the least common denominator. But who determines that? He just used this formula, what he called like a dialectic, taken from the philosopher Hegel, of these opposites and contradictories, as he called them, and whittled them down. This is just another way of saying it's relativism. Rather than explore the mysteries and how God created things, it was eliminate all differences, eliminate all opposites and things. And communism will be the tool that will do that for us. So communism becomes the savior of removing struggles that exist and among classes. And then ultimately, they're going to say that it's the sexual difference itself that has to be overcome and eliminated, because there's tension that exists between those two. They saw them as opposites, not complements. And so that was the end game, you can say, of communism. And these are the errors of Russia that have spread throughout the 20th century. And here we are. And communism has essentially lived out its agenda. It's fulfilled it. It's crossed all of these boundaries on a societal level, now even in America. And where is this going to lead? Well, Fulton Sheen said, when he started looking at this 80 years ago, he said, we're living in the days of the apocalypse. And he used that word in its real meaning. Apocalypse means an unveiling. There's a pulling back. There's a spiritual battle going on, and it's reaching a height, he said, between the mystical forces of Christ and the mystical forces of Antichrist. 30 years later, right before he became Pope, John Paul II visited the United States, and he said that we are living in the greatest historical confrontation humanity has ever gone through. He even called it the final confrontation. A few years after he became Pope, Sister Lucia Fatima said that we are in this final battle, and it's ultimately a battle over marriage and the family, because it is the marriage and the family that, more than anything else in creation, image God. So if you remove God, that's already a huge eclipse upon all truth. And then that eclipse, that darkness, if we don't let that light shine back through, it then affects marriage, it affects the family, and ultimately the sexual difference itself. The complete dehumanization of society. That's the goal of communism. That's as evil as it gets. And that's where we are right now. That battle is now, as St. John Paul II said, it is now at the pinnacle. That's the era in which we're in. But thanks be to God, it doesn't just end with those words that Our Lady said, in the end. Boom, period. That would be really depressing. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. My Immaculate Heart. She points out right away, it is her heart. What the world needs is a heart transplant. But she says, my Immaculate Heart. Mary isn't just offering the answer. She is the answer. What Mary is, we are all called to be. She's the one who bears God and his gifts to humanity. She first receives the gift, the fullness of God. She's full of grace. And that's where the word immaculate then becomes so important. It is because of Mary's sinlessness, Mary's purity, that allows her to be the perfect receptacle for God's image to shine through her. So powerful that does God shine through her, that wherever she goes, like here in Guadalupe, wherever she goes, she brings the power of God like no other. People see God through her. She didn't say one word in this image of Guadalupe, and look what happened. One image. They saw God through Mary and his power. and his tenderness over their civilization. And without a word, it was conquered. That's pretty awesome. The power of the image of God shining through us. Mary is what we are called to be. My immaculate heart will triumph. Our purity. When we have accepted the lies of Marxism, communism, okay, the lies are philosophical. We always think of like all the economic stuffs and the authoritarianism. That's just the fruit of accepting the philosophy part. Once it steals your soul, that's what happens. But we've accepted those lies, and it has darkened our intellects to the point where we don't even know right from wrong. We don't know who we are. We don't know what we are. So why not change it? Only matter matters. If we have the ability to change ourselves, let's change it. If we have the signs, if we have, just like Lucifer said, if you eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of science, you will be like God. So, well, today we have all that knowledge. We can be like God if we choose to be that. But that's the greatest lie of all. Because we first receive from God who we are, what we are, and then we live it. That's why Mary's the answer. She's the Marian dimension of every person, of every Christian especially. We receive that gift. And it is through purity that we can what? See God. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. How is this world going to go back to God? It's got to be able to see the path back. Mary right now, she's lighting that way. And this is where the theology of the body comes in, because the theology of the body was St. John Paul II's first major mission when he became Pope. His first 5 years of Pope was every Wednesday, feeding the faithful with this illuminating truth. Our intellects have been so darkened, and like St. Paul says, the more we sin, the more our intellects become darkened. Or at one point, we could even be calling the darkness light and the light darkness. He knew that over so many decades of people just accepting these lies, not only is it going to be, they're not going to be able to see the truth necessarily, they will know it not through what they see, but what they feel. Their hearts are going to be so injured and broken, they're going to want answers. Who's going to give it to them? Thanks be to God. John Paul II was inspired to be the prophet and the Pope of Fatima for our times. The day that of the assassination attempt on John Paul II was the day where he was going to announce this Pontifical Institute for the Studies for Marriage and the Family. Whoa, there's a spiritual war going on. And so what is the theology of the body over all of these teachings? It is the purification of the intellect that's become so darkened, and then our hearts and everything else so just wounded and things are twisted, to help let the light come in. That's what the theology of the body is, the purification of our intellect, because as our intellect becomes purified, then we can choose it. We can't love what we don't know. And that's why the theology of the body, when anybody comes across it, it radically changes their life. Radically changes. It changed mine a year ago. I've taken zillions of courses. Theology of the body brings everything together, all aspects of theology, because it brings it back to the person and the incarnation of Christ. The Word became flesh, and that's how we know God, through the Word incarnate. So the theology of the body is that great gift for us. And that's why the theology of the body is part of the triumph. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. What is the triumph then? When the whole world will embrace and see this truth, and then they live it. That's the triumph. When we all can see the image of God in ourselves and in everybody else that we see, that will affect how we act, how we love, and how we build up a whole new era. But you can see a lot of purification is going to have to happen. Just like to go back into the Garden of Eden, there was a flaming sword that the cherubim held. You're not going to enter into Eden without having to pass through that sword. The piercing of the heart of Christ on the cross opened that up to us. Mary's pierced heart, mystically united to Christ, that was she's the gate to Christ, the gate of heaven. Came through a piercing. It was hard. And we will have to go through that. Piercing of the heart. But we begin, right, the theology of the body makes that something we desire. Because the truth sets us free. So when we look at what's going on today with this coronavirus and all of this, and these analogies of an eclipse, I think there's a lot of things that are really interesting that are coming together if we use that the gift of wisdom. This eclipse that we're in of truth of ourselves, of God, it's reaching this point of totality. And if you've ever seen an image of an eclipse of reaching totality, we see something like you would think, it blocks all the light of the sun. It doesn't do that. When it reaches totality, you see the full disk of the moon, complete blackness. So the moon has done everything it possibly can by its shape to block the sun. And at the moment of totality, it doesn't accomplish its goal. It cannot conquer the light. Why? Because at that very moment is the one thing that we can see of the sun that we cannot see of the sun any other part of the day with our ordinary eyes. And that ring around the moon is called the corona. We see that crown of the sun at the moment of the greatest, you could say, the highest point of the eclipse itself. That's when the crown of the sun is seen. That's pretty awesome. Applying that to the spiritual world, to the moral world, and the times in which we live, we're basically there. And this should give us great hope. The eclipse is going to pass. It doesn't just stay there. And the sun comes out. And the more the theology of the body is able to reach the world, to a wounded world that has been so blinded, it will be like the man who was blind, and Jesus put clay of the earth, what he's made out of, and combines it with his divine spit, and then he tells him to wash it like baptism and allows him to see. He remakes the man with the clay, with the very substance of which he's made of. And that's like the world today. And Our Lady, she's the one who helps us. The triumph is this, this corona apocalypse that people kind of joke about. But it's true, it's real, the corona apocalypse. The unveiling that will take place as the eclipse moves is our ability to see God through Mary. That's why she's here. The Aztecs saw God through her, and the entire civilization was converted. We will see God through Mary because it was from her flesh that God came to us and related to us. And so we will go back the same way. This is the triumph when this reality is found in every heart, in every marriage, and in every family. And that makes life worth living. That makes these times worth enduring. And I pray for all of us here, it's something that we will persevere in with great hope. Our Blessed Mother, who is our life, our sweetness, and our hope. The only question that we have to answer is whether we will welcome the gift. The theology of the body is a gift. Do you want to know who you are? Do you want to know what you're made for? I've given it to you. I've given it to you through my great prophet, John Paul II. Fulton Sheen said, what he's going to give the world is going to be what the world has been starving for so long. How I wish I were young enough to be a part of that evangelization, to reach people where they're wounded. That's our role. Not only do you want to be healed, do you want to help others to be healed? The theology of the body is the beginning of that purification of ourselves and of the world and of the triumph. It starts now. Don't wait for it. It starts right now and with you. If you haven't gone to any of the Theology of the Body Institute courses, especially the TOB 1 as they call it, make every effort to do so. It will change your life. But welcome the gift, as Our Lady did. It's a gift that we have to welcome. Ask her during this month to give you the grace and the generosity of soul to welcome that gift. To conclude, Venerable Fulton Sheen gave a story that always stuck with me of a father who gave a son a puzzle. It was a puzzle of the world, sort of lots and lots of pieces. And he left it with him, and he's like, this is going to take him forever to finish. Well, he came back, I don't know, an hour or so later, and he saw his son had already solved the puzzle. And he said, how did you figure that out so fast? And the young boy said, well, I noticed on the back there was a picture of a man. And I noticed that as I put all the pieces of the image of man back together, the rest of the world just turned out all right. That's exactly what we're being called to do right now with the theology of the body. If we want to remake the world, we have to remake the individual, as Fulton Sheen said. And the theology of the body that John Paul II would then give us is that, you could say, that unveiling of how to do that.